welcome to the CMAX Silent Theater, and this is the home of Cisco Live's Innovation Showcases. Now, Innovation Showcases offer a look at the latest innovations from Cisco, not only providing the context, but also the inspiration today's IT professionals need to create the world of tomorrow. Now, today we'll be exploring the world of data. And to tell us about unlocking the power of data, we're going to hear from two great speakers, Faraz Rashid and Tom Edsall. So please give a warm welcome to our first speaker, Tom Edsall.
So good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? We're good? I'm not quite used to this new format. It seems a little odd to me to be up here in headphones while you guys are out there looking kind of funny with the blobs on your ears as well. So unlocking the power of data. Companies around the world are using data to unlock value in their data centers. Google uses it to target ads. Facebook uses it to suggest friends. Amazon to figure out what you should be buying next. And now with products from Cisco, Tetration, App Dynamics, you too can be using similar kinds of algorithms and similar kinds of mechanisms to unlock untapped data in your data centers. Now I'd like you to have a thought experiment with me for a second. Imagine that you are in the office, or in your office, you could listen in to every conversation between people in your office. Just a little bit, not so much about the content, but you'd have sort of the tone of what they're talking about. Who's talking to whom, what they're talking about, when they're talking, how fast they're talking, how efficiently they're talking. And if you could listen to all of these conversations over a period, and measure every single person, every single conversation, you understand who's saying what and who's hearing what. After about a week, you begin to have some pretty incredible insight what's going on in your office. You would know which groups are working together. You would know who's cooperating with who's dependent upon who's working hard and who's hardly working. With this kind of information, you start to understand where are the inefficiencies in your office. Is there somebody who is actually leaking confidential information? Maybe working for the competition. You could imagine getting all of this information with very little time. Well, now think if you could get that, first of all, I wouldn't want to work in such an office, by the way, just to be clear. But you might want to have that kind of insight into your data center to understand what applications are talking with one another, how they're dependent upon each other, how efficiently they're communicating. And that's what we're trying to do with these analytics platforms. So imagine you have this data center, there's information being exchanged left and right, servers are talking to one another, applications are interacting. And we're able to gather just a little bit of metadata about every single transaction, every single communication, every packet in that data center, and gather up all of this and bring it to a central location, put it into a big data lake, and then run machine learning algorithms on it to extract value. And that's what we mean when we're talking about extracting metadata and creating value for your business. So we scoop up all of this information, and the value we deliver is around policy, performance, compliance, security, and more. And so I'd like to talk through each of these things with you just a little bit and give you some customer examples of how people are really utilizing these capabilities today. And you can be using them in your data centers. Policy. Cisco IT was actually the first customer of Tetration. I say customer in quotes because they began to use it before we were shipping a product. They're a great place for us to try our products. They were in the middle of a transition from a classical data center into an ACI-based data center. And going to an ACI-based data center, you have to have a policy that describes the micro-segmentation of your applications. It's who can talk to whom. But they found that they had a problem that there was really no one person that was an expert in all of their applications. In fact, there are many applications that have evolved over the years, and so they had sort of the creep of crud that happens with the application. Things were changed, so nobody really knew what was going on in the data centers. So they found it very difficult to come up with those policies that they needed for ACI. So they brought in tetration. And with tetration, they were able to do what we call application dependency mapping. So with no prior knowledge of what's happening in that data center, we installed some sensors, gathered that metadata, watched it for a couple of weeks, and then ran our ADM algorithms. Those ADM algorithms then were able to extract in an automated fashion how all of these applications are related to one another. That allowed them to create this whitelist, this policy, this microsegmentation policy they implemented in the ACI, but it also allowed them to come up with an entire migration strategy, because they were migrating from a standalone network, and that's where we were running tetration. We weren't running it in the ACI network, we're running it in this quote unquote legacy network. And it enabled them to understand that here were two applications that were highly dependent upon one another, let's move them together. Oh, when we move these applications, we have to have these other services available to us. Now, interestingly, it also showed them quite a bit more about their applications they didn't know. It allowed them to see that some things weren't quite working the way they were supposed to be working, the way they thought they had been working. Because tetration looks at what's going on the network, we see what's on the wire, and the network never lies, we saw the ground truth. And having that ground truth gave valuable insights. We saw absolutely everything that was related to those applications. Now, the upshot of all of this is that they realized a 70% reduction in time for doing that application dependency mapping versus using traditional methods. Traditional methods, which would typically bring in consultants, sit there with an Excel spreadsheet, interview a bunch of people, do a couple of net stats on a few servers here and there. Well, instead we do it in a fully automated fashion. That translates to 3,600 person hours of skilled staff time, people who are highly paid. That's saved for every 100 applications. And Cisco IT has about 2,900 applications running in that data center. So it's significant savings for them. Now, one benefit that they saw here that they hadn't expected, weren't even looking for, wasn't even an objective. But they were able to go through and say, well, what servers or what endpoints, what virtual machines actually are the lowest performance, have the least amount of data? And they found a bunch of virtual machines that weren't even being used. That allowed them to reduce the VM footprint by 20 to 40%. Something we hadn't even considered. And that's one thing we're finding on a continual basis, that people are seeing this data that we've been extracting, and they're finding use cases we hadn't even anticipated. And that's one of the beauties of big data platforms. Compliance. HealthSouth is a healthcare company. Highly regulated. HIPAA compliance. They cannot afford to have a breach of their systems. They're based upon a lot of trust with their customer base and regulatory. They will be in a lot of trouble if something were to go wrong. They needed to come up with a policy model that allowed them to segment their network in a fine-grained fashion. It's well understood that the most effective way to secure a data center is to have a whitelist model, to be highly segmented, to only allow communication between those components that should be communicating. They also needed visibility. So again, they deployed tetration. With a series of sensors, they're able to understand what's actually happening in their data center. They do an application dependency mapping run, a machine learning run, and extract what that whitelist model is, and they use that to do their microsegmentation. This gives them the visibility that they needed. It gives them the insights that they had to have. Performance. There's a large telco. We weren't able to get permission to use their name in time for this conference. They provide service for cellular users, so massive amount of endpoints. Also very tricky for us because we can't put a sensor in the cell phones. The cell phones are outside of their data center. They don't own the cell phones. But we're able to use the sensors that are embedded in the Nexus 9300 and 9500 hardware. Now this happens to be an ACI customer, so running ACI networks. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to be able to ensure their SLAs. They want to know what's really the experience that their customers are getting from their data centers. They wanted to understand where latency is occurring, where drops are happening, where is congestion in their network. They're very, very concerned about performance of their network. Tetration coupled with ACI allows them to have that kind of insight. They get a time series of how the topology changes within their data center. So imagine flows that are going across this data center, this cellular connections, their customers connecting into the internet. And as the topology changes, we can track how those flows move around in that data center across that topology. We can start to see congestion as it occurs. We can start to see drops as they happen. So that kind of insight, the ability to look at that level of detail is simply unprecedented in the industry. They also are using it for deep forensic information. So for each flow that they have interest in, they can dive deeper. They can go in and see exactly what happened, and in a historical fashion. Imagine you had a year's worth of information that could tell you exactly when packets were dropped, what congestion was happening, what was the total amount of bandwidth being consumed by all of the data across your data center, across any link. Makes a big difference when a customer is having a problem on the weekend and you don't get to it till Monday. And you don't have to go and ask them to recreate that problem. Instead, you can go look at that historical data and you can see what happened. It completely transforms how you run operations in that data center. ADP. Now this is a security use case, and I'm going to roll a video, but hold on a second, don't roll it yet. This customer was interested in a microsegmentation use case, but they also are using a multi-cloud environment. So I want you to listen for those key words where they're using multi-cloud, because we do see that as the next generation for data centers, where we have on-prem data centers as well as data centers in the cloud. And we see almost all of our customers moving to a scenario where that's how their data centers are implemented. So go ahead and roll the video.
Cisco has worked with us on our data center infrastructure, our campus build-outs, but I think more importantly on how we think about delivering our technology to market.
You know, one of our primary goals over here is to manage our east-west traffic. So we're looking at tetration to help us with microsegmentation. That once we gather the data and then do the analytics through tetration, it will give us the information we need to do that microsegmentation very well.
Some of the key differentiators that tetration had that its competitors didn't, first was a true diversity in the technology deployment that it was going to provide. I mean, we're putting this technology across all of our critical infrastructure hosting areas, which includes around 70,000 servers in about 14 different data centers around the globe. It had to work in all of those. It had to work in conjunction with everything from our Linux population to our Windows population, and integrate well into our technologies that manage routing and flow throughout our data center. So first and foremost, it was diversity of platform support. Listen, we're not just going to be in our own data centers in 2 years or 5 years. This is truly going to be a commingled multi-cloud environment that'll be heterogeneously located across the globe. So how that technology is going to play into our strategy was as critically important. And the vision and the future product roadmap of tetration fits well into our plans. And it's going to help us be more proactive, drive faster to market our products, and be able to do things like multi-cloud integration of our security products and technologies into our go-to-market product sets. So it's really exciting from where we stand.
We believe that this is a robust, easier to deploy technology, and we're actually quite excited to get started on the journey.
So there you hear it directly from a customer, where they're trying to lock down their east-west traffic. They're moving to a microsegmented data center. They are multi-data center, and they're going to multi-cloud. Really a great use case for us. So what is tetration? So I already mentioned the sensors a little bit, but these sensors, they run in the guest operating system or in the hardware of the switches themselves. You can use one or both or a combination. For the guest sensor, the sensor running in the guest operating system, the nice thing about that is it can run on a bare metals scenario, in a virtual machine, and also allows us to gather information around containers. And that sensor, since it's in the guest operating system, can run equally well in the cloud as well as on-prem. So tetration can monitor workloads that are spread across the public and private infrastructure, all through a single pane of glass, all in a single consistent way. So these sensors gather just a little bit of metadata, a little bit of scrap of information around every packet or every flow, every piece of communication that happens in the data center. They get information about bandwidth utilization, they get information about latency, about the performance of the TCP stack, what protocols are being used, who's talking to whom, et cetera. They gather all of this information into the tetration platform. The tetration platform then does quite a lot of data reduction on this. You can imagine we're getting millions of events per second. We reduce that into something that's a little more manageable. We collate the information so we understand that a flow over here being sent by one server and being received by another server over here is actually the same flow, so we'll keep that as a single record. That information then is put into what we call a data lake. It's a big data store, nearly a petabyte of information. We can keep all of this information for 25,000 servers for a year. That's the kind of storage capacity we're talking about in the larger system. Then we run machine learning algorithms on that data. Application dependency mapping is a great example of one of those algorithms where we figure out what are the applications, how they should be grouped from a policy perspective, how they're dependent upon one another. That leads to a policy creation scenario or a data migration scenario or just a performance and understanding, a deep understanding that's happening in your data center. You can also bring your own policies into tetration. So run ADM, bring your own policies. In the case of Health South, I forgot to mention, is that yes, they did do an ADM run to understand what are the dependencies within their application, but then they had the HIPAA rules that they had to bring in, which you couldn't just infer from what's going on in the data center. So you can bring your own data, your own policies, the data that's discovered, all based upon attributes, combine them together to create policies. Now, since tetration has this huge data lake of information, now you can run those policies against the historical information in your data center. Think of it as a simulation or a network DVR, or just repeating what happened in the past and run against new policies. Then you deploy these policies. And tetration provides for the enforcement of the policies, and also we can down those policies into ACI, into the APIC controller, and they can be enforced in the network. A more complete security solution, in fact, does enforcement in the network and in the guest operating system. Sort of two faces, two lines of defense against intruders. That policy then is monitored on a continuous basis. As the packets are flowing across the network, we compare them against the policy to make sure that that policy is being enforced properly, that there's no one trying to work around it, that we can also understand what policies are being used and which ones are not. So then that can lead to how you will evolve these policies, because it really is a continuous life cycle of deployment, monitoring, rederiving, deployment, monitoring, just like a DevOps life cycle for software development that your people are using for application development in your own organizations. There's also a number of security applications where we monitor the processes in the server so we can understand for a given flow what process was the source of that information and which was the sink of that information. We calculate checksums on those processes and check them against public depositories of checksums to understand whether things have been tampered with. So a number of security use cases. Tetration is available in a couple of different platforms. We have the large, the medium, and cloud deployments. So the platform itself you can deploy in Amazon or on-prem, but the workloads can be both, on-prem and off-prem. That gives a lot of flexibility in how you will consume this product. And we have a complete set of ecosystem partners. We enable these through APIs. We have integration with the ones you see here, and plus a number of Cisco technologies. It's also possible to develop your own applications and run them in the Tetration platform to mine that data lake and understand what's going on there. You can create your own alerts that can be exported from the platform into other systems, or you can use the alerts that we've developed for you, the standard alerts. So very, very flexible deployment. Now looking at these Cisco technologies, there's one that I don't list here because we have a guest speaker today. Faraz is going to come and talk to us about AppDynamics as well. Faraz, come on up.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey, good to see you. Hey, Faraz, so we have a common customer, Standard Bank in South Africa, that has both Tetration and AppDynamics. Now, these products are kind of similar, but we're coming at it from different perspectives, aren't we?
We are. So the key thing for AppDynamics is we care about automatically discovering application environments, and that's everything from the discovery that you've talked about so far, but also going further into every transaction, what business is using the platform, what the business impact is of your technology. So the piece that we add to Tetration as we work on the integration is really to give the application context and the business context.
Well, that's great, because we come with that infrastructure context. We can see down to the packets, we can see the TCP stack, what's going on there, and then we can elevate that and hand off to AppDynamics. And through our API integration, we have a common vocabulary, a common way to talk about our applications, and that allows the two teams working together to be able to communicate in a more effective way.
Yep.
So Faraz, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks a lot, Tom. Cheers. Hi everyone, and thank you for attending the session. I think I find these headphones as weird because I've got to listen to my own voice as weird as Tom does. And interestingly, when we went through the rehearsal yesterday, the last time that I've worn headphones like these to listen to something when it's mute in the background is at a silent disco. And I did ask if you guys have the option to switch to another channel, so I'm not sure if you do or if you're paying attention, but if you do, I hope the music is good. My name's Faraz, I'm the European CTO for AppDynamics. I'll talk a little bit around who I am and how I ended up being here, and also I want to talk about AppDynamics very briefly as a company and how we became to be part of Cisco as we're the baby of the Cisco family. And then we'll go into how you unlock the power of data within your organization. So my background before I joined AppDynamics was I ran IT operations for Credit Suisse's wealth management business. So I did that for almost a decade, and I did that predominantly in a business-facing role. So I ran a team of 120 engineers that were globally based, and it was their problem to fix things when things broke, which inevitably meant that we spent a lot of time on conference calls for many hours trying to find the root cause of problems. And I'm sure that many of you in this room have faced that. So for me, we had a very, very acute pain that we were trying to solve, which is how do we cut down the time when we have a problem to actually getting to the root cause? And it was personal for me because I was called up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I spent 5 hours on these conference calls, and at the end of it, we'd gone through so many different log files and we'd spoken to the database team, and everyone had blamed the network for 5 times over, and we'd still found out that it wasn't the network. And we'd got to the storage team and it wasn't the storage team. And so we needed to find a more consistent way to do that. I got a demo of AppDynamics 2 years ago. I said I didn't believe that it was capable of doing what it was doing, so we took it through to production a week later. I spent the following year rolling it out across Credit Suisse and enjoyed it so much that I actually gave up my day job and joined AppDynamics to help other people do the same for a living. As I mentioned, AppDynamics is a fairly new part of Cisco. It's a year and 5 days ago that Cisco made an offer to acquire us, although no one's counting. And we were about to go for IPO, so we were 36 hours before we were about to float on the stock market for $1.9 billion. We had balloons and cakes in all of our offices to celebrate that we were about to be this proud independent company. People woke up to the news that we were now part of Cisco. And there was a lot of emotions that went through that, because for many people, they wanted to go through that independence and they wanted to be this application performance company that had really stood on its own. And for other people, it gave them the security and it gave them a future. I think looking back in hindsight, what's been incredible is actually the support that Cisco has provided us whilst allowing us to act independently, while still allowing us to integrate within their product set, has been fantastic. And it's really helped us drive our vision. And you'll hear from some of the sessions today around what that vision will look like. So it's been quite a journey. And I'll talk through now the reason that happened. So there's an interesting thing that's happened over the last sort of 8 to 9 years. And that's this. 8 years ago, when I had just over 8 years ago, when I had just joined Credit Suisse, I remember thinking about banking at the time. And online banking was, you went online and you checked your balance and you made a payment, and if it didn't work, you called them up. And if it didn't work, you went into a branch, and that was it. And no one really complained. So if online banking was down for 10 minutes or 1 hour, things were okay. No one really cared. And then this happened. So over the last 8 to 10 years, there's been a complete change in the way that we run our lives, run by these companies. So we look at companies like WhatsApp. They've changed the way that we speak to people. So we're less on the phone and we're more dynamically messaging each other because it's an easy way to communicate. We're actually spending less time verbally communicating with people as a result of that. You look at companies like Uber, they're fundamentally changing the way that that people transport, not only away from taxis. If you look in the US, there's actually a question about whether Uber's too big to fail, because they're replacing ambulances, they're replacing public transport vehicles, because it's much easier to use their technology in order to go and do that. And I don't know if anyone else had this problem, but it was a nightmare when I landed at Barcelona airport on Sunday and Uber didn't work. So I know personally I'm very dependent on the same thing. And you've got the same thing happening again and again and again. You've got Netflix that's disrupted the TV industry, Tesla, who still car manufacturers are struggling to be able to get to a point where they're producing cars that can equal what Tesla's producing. And that's after Tesla's released their patents, and that's after Tesla's been around for many years as well. So this is the new norm, and it's not just the new norm for a single thing. It's the new norm for what your users are expecting in terms of functionality, in terms of performance. It's the new norm for what your users want to work for. These are the companies that your users want to work for. These are the companies that you guys want to work for, or the people within your company want to work for. So these are setting quicker and faster standards than we've ever seen before. And that level of change has never ever happened before. So just think about what's happened in the last 8 years and compare it to 100 years of computing prior to that. It's not impossible for companies to get there. So if you look at companies that have been able to get there, actually even look at the company in the top left, Amazon. I often ask people what Amazon does for its business model. It's not a bookstore. It sells books online, but it's a grocery store. It has Alexa. It has a whole variety of products that really make it a core business for many people. So, and there's other companies as well. So The Guardian, for example, is a great example. 2011, The Guardian newspaper in the UK online used to make 25 deployments a year. Within 13 years, within 3 years, they've managed to switch that to 24,000 deployments a year. So they've managed to get through that. But the problem is, to be able to stay relevant and compete with these companies, you need to be able to act with agility. So you need to move quick. You need to keep pace with your competitors. You need to fail fast and recover quick, and you need to be able to change direction. And you need to act with certainty. You can't afford to fail, because if you fail today, there are competitors and challengers in the market that are waiting to take advantage of you that don't have all the complexities that traditional organizations have. And to act with certainty, you need to be able to act deliberately, you need to be able to predict failure and pivot, and you need to drive successful business outcomes. And that means you need a real-time view on today. So you need to be able to see what's happening today, and you need that within your business, and you need that within your technology. But more importantly, you need to have that in the context of your business and focused on what matters, because we all know that our data centers are filled with petabytes of data, but we have no idea what's important. That's the problem I had when I was problem solving at Credit Suisse. We knew where the root cause was eventually, but it took us so long to be able to get there. And the problem that we have is, to be able to do that, we're impeded by complexity. So you have hundreds and thousands of applications within your environment, and these were built from legacy or acquisitions or applications that were acquired from other companies. It's impeded by technology. So if you think about how traditionally you would go and build the ability to be able to look at real-time data, you would look at taking an end-of-day feed from multiple different systems. You would dump it into a data lake, for example. You'd have to crunch it to figure out how all the data translates together. Then you'd need an output. And by the time you've done all of this, the source system has probably changed. And also the way that you're deriving the data is too late. So it happens either after a few days or it happens on a monthly process. So if you want to get to real-time data, that adds even more to the technology problems. And then you have the problem of silos, which is we all work in organizations that are inherently siloed. And that's siloed within the business areas, that's siloed within the technology and business areas. So everyone's got their own view of what's important to them. So the IT support guys know what's important to them. The network people know what's important to them. The technology people think differently from what the people, the business people see. In fact, Forrester says that only 29% of businesses feel that when they have analytics, so when they fix some of the problems that I've talked about, actually connect those analytics to the business outcomes. And that's an incredible fact. So that's less than a third of companies actually think that their analytics are related to their business outcomes. And part of that problem is that the analytics are coming out from technology and they're based upon technology and technology decisions, but the technology and the business are completely disconnected. So you've got the application, the business are now converging together and they're talking somehow the same language, but the data behind the scenes hasn't. And the net result of what happens is this, and this is the problem that I had at Credit Suisse. You have a war room and you have a team that's on there from the technology side. So you have someone that's checking the logs. You have the app guy that comes on and says it's the database, it's always the database. You have the database team that says it's not the database. And this goes on for ages. And actually, we worked with PayPal a few years ago and coined the term mean time to innocence for this process, because it was a process of everyone trying to prove that it wasn't them. What we're not aware of, whilst all of this is happening on the other side. So the business is sat there and saying, we've got a problem with conversions, we have a problem with sales, we don't understand why this is happening. So fundamentally, we have two completely disjointed things, but they're all running through the same software that was designed for the same purpose. So this is where we come in, and our goal is threefold. We want to help you move fast, and we want to do that by wasting less time on solving problems that you don't need to solve, and being able to develop much quicker. We want you to follow everything. We follow every single line of code and every single transaction that runs through your system, and we do that automatically out of the box without any configuration required from you. And we allow you to focus on what matters the most, and we do that by telling you where you need to put your focus on. And here's how we do it. So we have a lightweight agent-based approach. You deploy our agents within your application environment, and you do that without changing any code. So that's across a variety of languages, Java, .NET, Node.js, PHP, Python. And we automatically map your application architecture. So we do that within a few minutes of you starting your application up with AppDynamics switched on it. We discover the application components, we discover the databases, the web services, the external companies that you're calling. Often this is the point that the surprises come out when we start working with a client, because this is when a client says to us, that can't be correct because I can see a test environment in there. This is the single source of truth that AppDynamics uses to drive what your architecture looks like. It's live, it's real time, and you can see a historical view as well. Next, we follow every single transaction. So we follow those transactions through every line of code, and we develop a baseline. So we figure out what's important based upon the time of day, the time of week, or the time of month. Why is that important? Payroll systems work on a monthly basis. If you look at trading systems, we have peaks, and our peaks are towards the end of the week, it's slightly busier, but the key points are on a daily basis at 3 p.m. UK/Swiss time. That's when things start to heat up, because that's when the US markets start to open up from a Forex and from an exchange perspective. So you need to know when things are going wrong and when they're important. So what our baselines do is they'll tell you, you're supposed to have 100 customers logging on at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. You have 5 or you have 1,000. So we'll tell you immediately when there's a deviation away from the norm. And that concept's really important, because we think that static thresholds are a thing of the past. We think static thresholds don't cut it in an environment where people expect for a cab to be outside within 2 minutes of hitting the button. Once we found the problem, we help you diagnose the problem. So it's 3 clicks to find the root cause of the problem down to code level. Again, at this point, we haven't changed any code. We've mapped your architecture, we've told you when things go wrong, and we tell you exactly what line of code they go wrong on as well. And this is underpinned by our enterprise IQ philosophy. We were built for the enterprise. We love complexity. So you can download our software off the web today, install it. You don't need to contact anyone in order to do it. And you can try it. It takes a few hours to get up and running within an enterprise environment. You don't need to configure it. And we work with tens, hundreds, tens of thousands of agents on a single controller. So there's no need to invest a huge amount on services. There's no need to invest a huge amount on infrastructure. And this is the way that we think the world's going to go in the future for application monitoring. So when we started up, our view was everything should be about looking at things from the single pane of glass of the user. We think the future is about understanding who that user is and whether or not they're relevant to what you're trying to do. So what you can do with AppDynamics, again without changing any code, is you can start to pick out the pieces of information that are important to you. You want to know when you had a problem, it was Mike Smith in London using the Travel Airways API that was trying to book an $1,800 holiday, because you can start to understand the business impact of your technology. And you can start to pull all of this data together to start looking at how does your revenue change when your technology performance changes, and how are those two linked? So if you look at examples where clients use us like that, the CEO of a major bank in the UK actually has AppDynamics in his office showing real-time mortgage performance against mortgage technology performance using AppDynamics to show him how customers change in their behavior and how much of that is down to technology. So that's us. We help you move fast by automatically discovering and mapping your environment. You don't need to configure anything. We baseline every single metric. We help you follow everything. We follow every single line of code. We do it from the view of the consumer, and we do it in production with no overhead. And we help you focus on what matters the most. So before I finish, I think it would be good, although you've got part of a customer's perspective from me, to also hear it from a customer. So here's what NASDAQ had to say when they deployed AppDynamics.
Most people know NASDAQ well in the United States for powering the NASDAQ market here. Globally, we have a much bigger footprint, and we power over 90 markets with our technology worldwide.
Our footprint, it's in the thousands of servers, on-premise, cloud. I think more importantly, our footprint is the number of different technology stacks that we have.
Some of the technologies that we are integrating currently are blockchain and the underlying tenets of blockchain, as well as machine learning, machine intelligence, and artificial intelligence across all of our lines of business. Prior to having the notion of business transactions, we were essentially in the dark and looking at things more from a technology perspective and with fragmented URL monitors as well as base level OS and other system monitors. Since we've had AppDynamics in place and had the notion of business transactions, it's created a one pane of glass experience across development and operations to truly understand what customers are experiencing and how the system is performing. And it's made it much more rapid in being able to resolve issues.
You'll see more adoption of the cloud, and especially the rapid pace of deployment or continuous delivery, continuous integration, leveraging technologies like microservices, which require real-time monitoring, better metrics collection, and data points to work with the business. For AppDynamics, it provides data points from user sessions to performance data, make us look at the platform as a whole and how that's being consumed.
We're very excited about evolving cloud architectures and technology and how that can drive our business into the future. Having AppDynamics in place has really changed how we work, both in terms of implementing new infrastructure or releases and troubleshooting issues. When you have an issue, it tends to be chaos, and it can even be miscommunication and finger pointing. And having one system that shows end-to-end what is happening really removes most of those challenges. Our customers want the flexibility to deploy in public clouds, private clouds, or hybrid infrastructures. And we need to evolve our applications to deliver that.
Having the right tool, especially an innovative one such as AppDynamics, really brings us closer to our transformation journey.
So to sum up, that's unlocking the power of data using tetration to look at deep level infrastructure data, to look at process decisions, to look at driving how your network traffic and your security decisions work, and looking at AppDynamics for your business level data, to look at who your customers are, how they're impacted by your technology, to look at how your application's performing right down to the code level. Thank you very much for today. I'm going to hand back to our host with the most, Toby, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Do come and join us by the AppDynamics booth if you get some time.
Cool.